For nearly 50 years, abortion, infanticide, the slaughter of innocent preborn children, has been the law of the land. The floodgates opened in 1965 with the U.S. Supreme Court case Griswold versus Connecticut. That decision legalized the use of contraception for married couples. And on January 22, 1973, the majority of the justices on the High Court made abortion legal in every state in the United States, even though the majority of Americans back then opposed it. Now, 50 years and 65 million murdered babies later, abortion is accepted as normal by an astounding number of Americans. But Roe v. Wade has always been a bad ruling. Even left-wing Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg thought so. Despite being an abortion activist herself, Bader criticized the ruling in a 1992 address, saying, it invited no dialogue with legislators. Instead, it seemed entirely to remove the ball from the legislators' court. In 1973, when Roe issued, abortion law was in a state of change across the nation. As the Supreme Court itself noted, there was a marked trend in state legislatures toward liberalization of abortion statutes. Around that extraordinary decision, a well-organized and vocal right-to-life movement rallied and succeeded for a considerable time in turning the legislative tide in the opposite direction. I think this is the major point here, Brad, that when we look at how all of this came to be, you go back to those early Supreme Court cases, Griswold and Eisenstadt, all those things sort of broke down the moral code that had been upheld legislatively and legally in the country. And then you sort of cleared the way because of the right to privacy, which doesn't exist the way they claimed it did. And you paved the path for this. And the fact that the ruling was bad law, even the pro-aborts agreed that, didn't stop the killing.
I can't believe when I first came across Ruth Bader Ginsburg's address here, how prescient she was. She's saying the morality is changing, the laws are changing, how right she is 50 years later. Yeah. If they had let this stew on its own, it would have already marinated into death. Look at the referendums. We're going to get into that, but look at what happens at the grassroots level. And we're going to find out that the people who were fighting the pro-life fight just had one issue, which was Roe. Yeah. Now you have the hearts and minds of all the people across the country, and she knew about that and how that was affecting the laws, how right she was. And it's, in a way, it was almost good that she had Roe because it caused people to stand up and fight a little bit. What happens if there never was that Roe? And you just had kind of that slow slide into immorality? We might even be in a worse spot here. Yeah, I mean, I think, if you certainly look at the referendums from the midterms and, the things that had already happened in New York and right in the wake of the Dobbs decision overturning Roe, and then California and a few places, and there's 8 or 9 states right now and we're in one of them, here in Michigan, where you can kill a child, up to, beyond birth. Beyond birth. So there certainly seems to be that trajectory happening, not necessarily legislatively, but referendum-wise. I'll be shocked if in 2024, the presidential election, many of these states that are kind of identified as purple, kind of a bit of a mix, and they're close either way for Democrats or Republicans. If I'm the Planned Parenthood crowd, if I'm the pro-child killing crowd, why would I not introduce a referendum? I mean, I'm 7 for 7 here. Why wouldn't I introduce that into the legislative mix? The election day or election, 4 months or election season, whatever they call it now. I haven't lost one of these yet. Why would I think I would lose in, anything except the deepest of the deepest red states? And, I'll get around to those. If I'm a pro-child killer, I'm going to get around to all 50 states. But, I have to put these in order and go through and do whatever it is. So all of a sudden, at the end of those kind of political process and the propaganda process, now all of the, states that are all pro-abortion can point to these few exceptions, and they're the outliers and they're the extremists, and who wants to go do business in a state like that, and all the demonizing starts that the left is so good at when they do this. I mean, you've got going on, you've got 20% roughly of the states already in favor of not just abortion, but abortion plus
So I think as we look down the road here politically, we may arrive at a point in the very near future that, absent the Roe ruling per Bader Ginsburg, we may have had already arrived at, as you say, just some point after that.
Oh, absolutely. And I think a great takeaway, like I said up front on this show, is to kind of set the beacon. Where are the battles in this pro-life war going to be fought? And that's what we want to discuss here today on this 50th anniversary of Roe, because it used to be it was all about the Supreme Court and overturning one ruling. As we found out, that has nothing to do with where the pro-life fight is now. It's about every single heart and mind across the country. How do we address that? These referendums, that's at the grassroots level. That can't even be touched by the Supreme Court anymore, unless we find a silver bullet, which we'll also be bringing up later on in the show.
The other interesting point here is that the pro-life movement as a movement, Michigan is a really good example of that. There's Michigan Right to Life, which was broken away from by a smaller group, largely Catholic run, that understood the real heart of the issue here is contraception. And the moment you put something out there that says, hey, you can decouple sex from procreation, well, then you open the floodgates for this. There's no way around it. You open the floodgates for everything. And, even Justice Kennedy in the 92 Planned Parenthood versus Casey rule, or Casey versus Planned Parenthood ruling, he came out and said, look, people have organized their lives around the ability to have an abortion when their contraception fails.
Yeah.
This is the Supreme Court saying that 30 years ago. So, but the pro-life movement, because they saw it like, let's just have this big tent and let's have everybody save babies. Well, of course that's a noble goal, but the more you open up that wide tent, the more you dilute yourself. So, are you really going to turn around and say now? Because what do you have to do? You have to go and say, no, you can never not do this. Always, every single life. Well, does that include the Petri dish in the lab where the IVF babies are being made? Yes, it does. You're really going to tell people who, can't have children that, oh, no, you can't do it. You're going to tell, like, medical researchers, oh, no, you can't do this because, the second you combine that sperm and that egg in that dish in your lab, you have a human life. But that's what needs to be done, because those battles were not fought 50 years ago. Now you're much further down the road with an entire society conditioned to think that those things are okay.
And moving on with the LGBT battles and same-sex marriage out of all that.
Absolutely.
Fast forward to December 2021, President Donald Trump appointed 3 conservatives to the High Court. Both sides then saw the real possibility for Roe to fall. Standing outside the Supreme Court building on December 1st, Michael Voris supposed the judges, speaking of Justice Brett Kavanaugh specifically, might overturn it.
We're not saying that nobody can have an abortion. We're saying it needs to go back to the states. It needs to get out of this court. It's been 50 years here, almost 50 years. It needs to get out of this court. It's not a court decision, and it needs to happen out there. Of course, look, pro-lifers would say, look, let's underline the 14th Amendment and say that's a human being. You can't kill it without due process, and that just gets rid of all abortion. I don't think anybody thinks the court's going to go there, although that'd be fantastic if they did. But when you get to the question of should we dump Roe and then just let the states decide, well, all right, I think you have a logical thing there. And I think that's what he was setting up. It was he was sort of encouraging him to bring it out, Stewart to bring it out and saying, so, you're not saying get rid of all abortion, just saying some states would have some and some states wouldn't, right? And he's like, yep. So I think that's a little card he wants to take into Chambers and say, look, this isn't the end of abortion. If you want to get an abortion, go over there where you can get one. But this state should have the right to say, we don't want it.
Then on June 24th, 2022, the conservative judges did overturn 50 years of bad precedent with the ruling on Dobbs v. Jackson. Justice Samuel Alito wrote in the majority opinion that there had never been a constitutional right to abortion. Quote, until the latter part of the 20th century, there was no support in American law for a constitutional right to obtain an abortion. No state constitutional provision had recognized such a right. Until a few years before Roe, no federal or state court had recognized such a right, nor had any scholarly treatise. Indeed, abortion had long been a crime in every single state. Now,
that's the key point.
That's
that
precedent.
There was no societal, legislative, historical, legal precedent for abortion.
Every single justice that Trump put up their nomination, they said, what about the precedent? 50 years.
Right.
What about 200 years of precedent?
Yeah, before that.
No one cares about that.
Right.
But that 50 years was sacrosanct.
Right.
And, you also brought up the silver bullet there about personhood.
Mm-hmm.
It is the only silver bullet that we would have. And that all started with Blackmun. We're jumping ahead of ourselves here, but that will be the silver bullet that kills this if the Supreme Court has to weigh in on it, because equal protection on personhood. So we'll be circling back on that. But apart from that, going back to the states, it's at the grassroots level. Now, every single heart and mind out there saying, marriage isn't for children. Look at all the LGBT people getting married. It's not for children. Look at all the contraceptive couples out there. Not even for marriage. Look at all the people that are cohabitating and just, hanging out. It's about my own happiness and my own, the ability to have an orgasm and to have no responsibility or repercussions from it. So I really think there's a huge mountain to lift, a moral mountain to lift in this country.
Oh, sure. All this has done now, really what the Dobbs decision did was simply open up the discussion that should have been had 50 years earlier and wasn't. I mean, Ruth Bader Ginsburg's right in that you sort of cut off the discussion. Mm-hmm. The problem is, in the ensuing 50 years, with these tens of millions of deaths and the acceptance of it, and nobody sort of really batting an eye at it anymore, and the people who would have objected back in 1973, a lot of those people are dead. I mean, I remember sitting that opening that we had with Walter Cronkite. I was 11 years old when that came down, and I remember sitting on the couch, because I used to watch news when I was a little kid because I was a nerd. I remember that live, and it was like, wow, this is... and there had been a show on a couple weeks earlier, about a month earlier, prior to that, an old TV show called Maude, which was a spin-off of the famous All in the Family. And there was a scene in there where, they were tackling the abortion question, and the show was set in New York. New York had they either had just passed at the end of 1972, or they were still in deliberations about it, a pro-abortion law in the state of New York. Again, it's 1972. And it became the impetus for a two-part episode on the Maude show, and our older viewers may remember that. And the whole question was, hey, this is okay now. It's all right now, Mom. It used to be a dirty word. Adrienne Barbeau played B. Arthur's daughter. B. Arthur played Maude. And she was this sort of young, on fire feminist. And, abortion's not a dirty word anymore, Mom. And I remember sitting there watching that show. My parents were in the room, and I was 11. And I turned to my mom and I said, "What's abortion?" And my mom just looked at me and said, "That's where they go into the mommy's stomach and kill the baby."
Wow.
And I went, "What?" Just completely, she didn't say, and Jesus doesn't say that's good or that's against church teaching.
You didn't have to have it.
You didn't have to. Just a natural response. And I said, "Why would they kill the baby?" And that was because of that show, Maude.
Wow.
And and then a month later, Roe v. Wade handed down, and I saw that Walter Cronkite note there. So, when you think about, that was the response back then. Would an 11 or 12-year-old have that response today?
We're pretty
if
numb.
They were watching it.
We're
You're just numb to it. Now, because now it's not presented as killing a baby. Now it's presented as a woman's right, and she's a victim, and it's constitutional right. Every single story post-Dobbs, what was it? The constitutional right to an abortion has been taken away. Well, Samuel Alito just said right there never was a constitutional right to abortion. It was created out of thin air, and in fact, Ruth Bader Ginsburg essentially backed him up on that. Yeah,
with regard to that natural rejection of slaughtering the unborn, the other people who are numb to it, the politicians, and we're jumping ahead a little bit, but the politicians see it as such political expediency. They're like, "You idiot, you can't stand on this hard line. How can you do that?" And so with our leaders out there seeing political expediency and the people out there being numb at the grassroots level, it is really a hard lift to get this, make America moral again.
Yeah.
That was my original reaction back when...
You're not in a vacuum here. This has not remained static. In the last 50 years, America has become vastly immoral. 50 years ago, you might have been able to stand up and make the argument about contraception because it was just 7 years after the Griswold decision.
People had a bit of a conscience and twitch.
Yeah, I mean, you know, when that came down, I mean, the whole, you know, the Humanae Vitae from Paul VI was just a few years old.
Which everybody was rejecting. Bishops, priests, people had a visceral reaction. And this really is on the backs of Catholics, Catholic contracepting couples who are just in the tank for abortion, or in the tank for contraception. So there is no more. And already your sixth commandment, your twinge on the sixth commandment, and then anything that comes before that, which is murder, starts to wane.
Sure does.
And I really believe in a seamless garment on this, that, you know, you accept one evil, you can accept them all over time.
You have to. You know, the morality is, in the end of the day, an all or nothing proposition. When Roe was overturned, so-called trigger laws took effect in 13 states, immediately banning abortion or nearly banning it. But last August, Kansas voters in a referendum overwhelmingly supported abortion. And in the November midterm elections, pro-life measures, they didn't fare well at all. On January 1st, Donald Trump commented. He said this: "It was the abortion issue poorly handled by many Republicans," and get this, "especially those that firmly insisted on no exceptions, even in the case of rape, incest, or life of the mother, that lost large numbers of voters."
Wow.
That's exactly the point right there.
Wow.
You know, 50 years ago, you could have made that argument. You know, that, well, look, this is still a baby. The fact that he came into existence through rape doesn't change the fact that it's still a baby. Of course, it makes the, I think it's rather public knowledge. My own mother was a victim of rape in a very horrible, extraordinarily horrible situation. Her father-in-law raped her. So, that's not to downplay the trauma of rape by any means. It is to say that regardless of how the baby comes into existence, it is still an independent human being baby with a right to life. Could you have made that argument 50 years ago to people who might go, yeah, I think you might have been able to. But now, with 50 years of Hollywood and news and all of this, man, you talk about being at the bottom of the hill, having to push the largest boulder up that hill, with people on the other side of it pushing it down. Well,
my takeaway on that right there is you got to be politically expedient. And when Trump is saying, it's because of these hardliners who say no exceptions, I'm like, what are you saying? Well, what if we said that maybe, 3,000 Republicans, or maybe just 3 House of Representative GOP, or 3 senators or something have to be killed today? Is that okay?
All right.
Well, you're saying 3,000 babies have to be killed. Well, a certain portion of those have to be killed today.
Sure.
So you can go ahead and get elected. So you're still throwing some babies on the ash heap just for political expediency. Mm-hmm. Make the exception for rape and incest and all this other stuff. Life of the mother doesn't really happen as much as they talk about that idea today.
Well, all of those exceptions, I never hear the argument back. It's not a sound philosophical argument, but it is a polemical argument that you could make. You say, okay, listen, you pro-aborts out there, since rape, incest, and life of mother comprise roughly 1% of all cases of abortion, let's do this. You agree to ban 99% of the abortions, and I'll give you the 1%. How's that? We can't make that argument, obviously, from moral.
Well, in a moral standpoint,
but you can make it from a
lessen it. You're voting for a lesser moral evil, which actually, in morality, you're saying, I'm trying to vote to limit it. And in that sense, if you're looking at it that way, you can make an argument there on that. We went through that at the seminary level with Milady and others that are saying, yeah, if that's the way you're couching it, that you already have it severe, you're going to kill 100 people. Hey, can we neck that down? Can we save 97 of them? I would vote to save 97 right now because you're going to kill 100 right now. You can actually make that slide. And that's not the same as political expediency that says, well, just go on a platform that says I'm okay for killing some babies. That's not exactly the same.
No, it's not the same. You might wind up in the same end point, but you get there by different means, and how you get to an end point is part of the moral question.
Yeah.
But again, there's is there a we're about to get into looking at what's happened in the various states, and everybody was cheering and all of that. The 15-week ban, which is what the Dobbs case was about in Mississippi, and the 15-week ban, and then of course the Texas 6-week ban and everything. It's like, there's this Nellie Gray, who was the kickoff of the March for Life. no exceptions. No exceptions
Catholic
whatsoever.
Nellie Gray.
Catholic Nellie Gray. There are no exceptions. So is there, it's a tough call from sort of a moral perspective. You can allow to a degree an incrementalism to achieve a good, as long as you go back and fight. Then once you've gotten what you get, now you turn your guns and you try to get it back until you get yourself to proper moral standing. Is that happening in some of these states? Is that happening? I mean, you've got to, it's not just abortion, it's the cause of abortion. Again, as the liberal Supreme Court Justice Anthony Kennedy said, abortion exists because contraception fails. 50%, according to Planned Parenthood, 50% of all abortions in the United States happen because the contraception failed.
And even when we're talking about erosion of moral conscience, which is where we're at today, because we have to change the heart and mind souls of the people at the grassroots level, when you are on the stance of saying, well, for rape, incest, life, the mother will go ahead and kill the baby.
Right.
The guy did the crime and the baby does the time.
Yeah.
Okay, and that's not fair, but that's the way it is. Doesn't that also erode people's conscience?
Sure,
where it's okay to kill babies just if they're in this pool,
right,
and in this situation, well, that also is what we're having to fight now.
Yeah, there's a lot of, we're not where we were 50 years ago in the discussion. And now that the question of abortion is in the hands of you, me, and all voting Americans, we can see from this map we're going to put up here and study with you exactly where the battle lines to abolish abortion are drawn. So let's go to the map, guys. As you can see here, and this is what we're going to do, going up each one, we'll look at each color individually. The blue states that you see there, Texas, Oklahoma, Alabama, mostly through, not quite totally the heart of Dixie, but certainly close, and Idaho and South Dakota, those states have a ban on abortion, nearly a total ban. Now, we should tell you, this information comes from this map, and the information that is contained in it comes from the Alan Guttmacher Institute, which is, of course, the sort of record-keeping folks for Planned Parenthood. As evil, rotten, murderous, horrible, hell-bound, all that stuff is, they are pretty good with their numbers. They do keep track of all of this stuff. They've been actually the most honest reporters on the numbers of abortions, even over the Centers for Disease Control and all of that. Alan Guttmacher keeps the numbers, that institute for Planned Parenthood, which is what it is. It's their head count number. Head counting arm keeps really good numbers and all of this. So in those blue states there are near total bans on abortion. They're saying it, Planned Parenthood and Guttmacher are saying it's a ban. It's a form of a ban. There's exceptions here and there. But for the most part, it's certainly much better than it was. If we look up at both North Dakota and Wisconsin there in green in the upper Midwest, there are no abortion chambers now existing in either of those states. Where things stand legally, that it's a bit of a question, but the decision has been made, perhaps in correspondence with the prevailing legal environment in those two states, perhaps just as a pure economic decision, but in either case, in both North Dakota and Wisconsin, there simply are not any abortion chambers open. So that's certainly good to cheer on. Let's look at the 4 orange states we have there, Utah, Arizona, Georgia, and Florida. They have bans starting at 6 weeks. Beyond 6 weeks, you cannot have an abortion. Those are legislative bans that are in effect. The 3 states we see there in purple, Wyoming, Indiana, and Ohio, they have bans on abortion that right now are still going through the legal process, and they're held up in court. And I think everybody who understands the abortion game understands that the moment something is passed, Planned Parenthood takes its $500 million that it gets from U.S. federal taxpayers through the child killers in Congress, and uses it to whip up to go find select judges and run their cases through those courts and, try to delay things and stall them and all that sort of thing. So that's what's going on in those 3 states. And then there are 3 more states. These ones are red: Montana, Nebraska, and Iowa. They are in the process right now. There's legislation going through in those state capitals to actually ban abortion. So those would probably be added eventually to the blue states that we have colored there in blue right now. But as we look at all of this, Brad, we can leave it up for a little bit if people want to keep looking at it. But you know, there's a philosophical worldview approach in each of those states, because now it is a states issue. That's what Dobbs did. It kicked it back to the states. So instead of one big giant Supreme Court ruling, you now have 50 individual state rulings or state laws. How do those laws get to be? They could be through referendum. They could be through, like we saw in Kansas. By the way, every state there that's white, you know, you can kill a child as frequently as you want, however you want, you know, 2-3 weeks after or post-abortion. If a baby survives, you know, just go ahead and throw it in a closet and let it die. I mean, that's what those white states are. By the way, those white states comprise a massive number of the U.S. population.
Everything else is a flyover state, basically, what they call. You know, those are those states that
Florida and Texas. I mean, you know, those are where your populations are right there. So that's when you're talking about the number of Americans that support abortion, not just the number of states, but the number of Americans. That's a big, hefty percentage. There's probably 2 out of 3.
If you look at the presidential election map, you're going to see about the same map. You know, you get these states that are in white. They're the ones determining the election, like you say, with the exception of Texas and Florida. All those other little states, just, you know, GOP-run states, and it's, you know, they have the common sense there not to kill babies. But they're not in the majority here. And now it's on a state like Kansas referendum. You know, states like Kansas.
You know, and to that, we did a little special on that afterwards.
People say we're going to kill babies in this state. We, the people.
Yeah. The idea that, you know, and I know a lot of that was like a shock to the pro-life world, because all the early polls had suggested it was sort of nip and tuck, and when it all came out at the end, it was, you know, near 2-1. I think it was like 60, whatever it was. It was a big gap. It was a big margin, much larger than people had anticipated on either side. And immediately the kind of stick your head in the sand, blame it on something else. It's not really, this isn't real, there's cheating, they stole, they rigged the election, and all this stuff. The pro-life movement has got to get off of this you know, head buried in the sand platform and realize you're dealing with a country that has, and that means all 50 states, you're dealing with a country that has essentially become immoral.
Right.
And human life doesn't matter like the way it used to. And, you know, all the political correctness and the Black Lives Matter and this and just all of it, that whole wokeness thing is designed to destroy and undermine America. And it's happening on every level, you know, every institution we have, including, sadly, to some degree, you know, in the church. And nobody really wants to, or few people in the pro-life movement really want to stare into that horror, that evil, and realize, oh my gosh, this is a Leviathan. How do we just, so that they're always going, oh, well, when that happened, that doesn't really happen, somebody cheated. No, it happened. You know, you can't cheat, you know, 18% of the vote. You just can't. So there has never really been, you know, there's been the single focus, as you said earlier, this sort of single focus on just save the baby. Okay, well, sure, but there are many, you know, ancillary things to that. And one of them is, you know, talking about the value of life. It's not just, oh, the baby, the innocent little baby. I mean, it's also, how did that baby come into being? You know, how many people in the pro-life movement are relatively accepting of their family members who live together?
Oh, LGBT, we got all the stats on that. 60%. They lean left more if you're going to a Catholic Mass on a regular Sunday.
Yeah, a little, not terribly shocking there in some cases. Pro-lifers took part in the first annual March for Life in D.C. on January 22nd, 1974, exactly 1 year after Roe v. Wade. That was Nellie Gray, God rest her soul, who organized that entire thing, gave up a lucrative law practice, got a tiny little apartment in Washington, D.C., and for the next essentially 40 years devoted her entire life to doing nothing but organizing that march and fighting against abortion. It became the largest and longest running annual protest in the nation, with huge crowds, hundreds of thousands, at one point 500,000, descending on the nation's capital every year to protest and pray against the scourge of abortion. Now that the abortion issue has been kicked back to the states, it remains to be seen what will come of the March for Life in years to come.
We're going to take a moment here to pull away to D.C., where we have Nick Wiley standing by, boots on the ground. Nick, how we doing out there?
Doing well, Brad. Got my cameraman extraordinaire, Hunter Bradford, here with me. We're out in D.C. at the March for Life. I've been talking to a bunch of people here, and we got some mixed reactions, and just kind of mixed in the plan of what the future is for the pro-life movement.
Yeah, that's an interesting angle there. I really want to hear more about exactly what you're hearing from the people out there with boots on the ground. What are you hearing from the people? What's your takeaway from the people themselves towards the future of the pro-life movement? Because these people are participating in the longest and largest running protest in the history. And this is the first one, 50 years of this. This is the first one after Roe. So what's the direction? What are the people telling you out there?
Yes, I've talked to people from tons of different organizations, and sort of the message is very hopeful. Everyone seems to just be really hopeful for the future. But when I've asked them specifically how do they intend to go forward, it seems the answers are kind of lacking to me. It doesn't seem like people have a clear game plan or a clear front of how do we all pursue this thing forward. It seems like people are like, okay, in my organization, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. But it's kind of, to me, seeming like Band-Aid solutions. Like, of course, there are good intentions. They want to help people. They want to help mothers. But I haven't heard people really say, okay, what we need to do is we need to fight for the Supreme Court, for the federal law to define personhood, to truly protect the rights of the unborn. It's more like, okay, we're gonna, we're gonna do more work at crisis pregnancy centers. We're gonna do more of what we're doing to educate people, which are all good things. But what we have to do is have the Supreme Court and the law eventually truly recognize, not define, but recognize the fact that all people from conception are humans and that life is protected under, I believe, the 14th Amendment. And so that's what we really need to have. And no one's told me that. Everyone is just saying, we're going to do more of what we're doing already, basically, which, as we've seen for 50 years or so, didn't amount to much. Sure, some lives are saved, but over 64 million abortions in America. And to just say, hey, we're going to do what we've already been doing, but we're going to do it harder, doesn't seem like a great solution to me.
Well, that's great insight out there as far as the Supreme Court ultimately is going to have to come down and stand on the fact that life begins at conception and that every person is protected under the 14th Amendment. You know, that's going back to what ended slavery, starting to see that, people are persons, not property. It's unfortunate, though, that so many people there don't get that memo. I hope they do pick up that wave. We do have, right in the middle of this special here, 50 years after Roe, and we're trying to hit home on what is the direction the pro-life movement and the big consensus out there. It's got to be personhood as a silver bullet. If they're going to keep marching to the Supreme Court, the steps of the Supreme Court, that's the angle now. So thank you very much out there, Nick, for reporting out there. And we'll be looking more for a follow-up report on Monday.
Absolutely. Thank you, Brad.
Justice Harry Blackmun, in the Roe v. Wade decision itself, noted a simple way to blow up abortion forever. He said, quote, if this suggestion of personhood is established, Roe's case, of course, collapses, for the fetus's right to life would then be guaranteed specifically by the 14th Amendment. Joining us now to discuss that particular issue of personhood is pro-life warrior Father Stephen Imbarrato, known as the protest priest. Thanks, Father, for joining us. How are you?
Oh, it's so good to be with you today.
Well, let's talk about the personhood thing. First of all, so people know, you've gone through, the wars, the battles, the everything, the arrests, all of it, for this particular issue, of abortion, and of course, owing to your Catholic priesthood and Catholic faith and all that, all the larger issues around it as well, contraception, all of it. So, using that as the background of this, how challenging would you say the personhood amendment is going to be to pass, because there's even opposition within the U.S. hierarchy to the notion of personhood?
Well, I'm not talking about an amendment anyway. I truly believe that in spite of the fact that we have a slim majority in the House of Representatives, a no majority, a minority in the Senate, and of course an apostate baby-killing Catholic in the White House, that we can, in the next couple of years, abolish abortion through constitutional personhood from the moment of conception, because we have enough justices on the Supreme Court that I believe, if forced to deal with this issue, will have no choice but to recognize what's already in the Constitution under the 5th, 14th Amendment. Of course, our founding document, Declaration of Independence. So I just see things completely different than I think almost everybody in the pro-life movement. I see us right now, after Dobbs, with the overturning of Roe versus Wade, we are in a post-Dred Scott Civil War, pre-Civil War America. That map that you posted absolutely shows that. Mm-hmm. If you go back to Lincoln's address in 1858, a house divided cannot stand. That's what we're looking at. He said, look at this country either has to be all slavery or all free. Can't stand divided. Well, we're in the same place in regards to this personhood issue. And I just believe we need one case and get it to the Supreme Court, and they will be forced to recognize what already exists. Again, constitutional person from the moment of conception. So, and I really think, Michael, go ahead.
So let me ask you, I mean, I don't know if you caught the part earlier in the show where I was standing on the steps of the Supreme Court immediately the night of the arguments of the Dobbs arguments in December of 2021. You know, there were 4 possibilities that the court could have done then. One was just, ignore it and just, rule against the Mississippi law, which nobody thought was going to happen. 2, they could have narrowly ruled just in the Dobbs case, upholding just the Mississippi law. 3, they could have done what they did, which was say, hey, this isn't a thing for the Supreme Court. Take it back to the states. You guys figure it out on your own. But 4, they've already had the chance to, they could have said in Dobbs, we're striking down every pro-abortion law in the country. The 14th Amendment guarantees the right to due process. If you're a person, this child in the womb is a person, or in a petri dish or a test tube or anything else. That's the definition of what it is. So they had the case in front of them and they punted. What would it look like in the future to bring another case forward? I know nobody argued specifically the personhood, so it gave them kind of a way out of going to address that, but they could have. And seeing as how they could have and they punted, do you think there would be a appetite on the court now, the high court now, to take up that case?
Right this moment, no. There's no groundswell of clamoring, demanding personhood from the moment of conception. So why would they? Right. Honestly, I think this is the way it came down. We have that leak that came out. I think it came down this way, and I think Clarence Thomas is behind the whole thing. I think that Clarence Thomas and Alito went to Roberts and says, we want to recognize personhood from the moment of conception. And Roberts freaked out and said, it'll lead to a civil war, and I'll prove it to you. Let's leak the draft of just overturning Roe versus Wade and see what happens. And there was a huge backlash. So I really believe that they agreed to take an incremental step, one incremental step. Let's put it into the states. Now, this is so obvious because I'm sorry, Michael, your right to life, my right to life, everybody's right to life, including the preborn, is not predicated or derived from any state legislature, and even the will of the people. It's an inalienable right endowed by our Creator. This is a mockery of our Constitution, our founding documents, and we will not, until we recognize the dignity from the moment of conception, that these babies are made in the image and likeness of God, unique, precious, and unrepeatable, this country will remain immoral. Because if you can mass murder babies, you're capable of doing anything. And I want to add one thing. We have had excluded classes in our country from the beginning, right, from its existence, right? We have an excluded class now. It's the last remaining excluded class, preborn babies from the moment of conception to the moment of birth. But for the first time in our history, we are mass murdering that excluded class. That's unprecedented. And see, I speak this way all the time. Nobody else is speaking this way.
Well, we
Nobody's
do.
calling it a constitutional crisis. And you guys, that's right, exactly right. And I'm trying to gather the few people, all right, that are, so that we can create this groundswell demand, this clamoring, along with the case, all right, that will go to the Supreme Court. And imagine them given the case, and that's why they've avoided it for 50 years.
Right.
They've avoided 50 years because they know the truth. But imagine them being presented with a case that they're forced to review. And then they deny personhood from the moment of conception. What's their legacy going to be, not just here in the history, right, but when they see Jesus face to face, because most of these dudes are Catholic, right?
Yeah.
So I just see it very, very clearly. It's very simple to me. And I think when the pro-life movement, when the bishops, when the conservative movement, when the Republican Party come together and unite and focus on this constitutional person from the moment of conception and demand that the Supreme Court of the United States review and recognize what we already know is there.
You know, I find it interesting, Father, the question was put to the latest, Biden's latest pick, Jackson, what is a woman? And she being a woman couldn't quite, you know, that was a bridge too far. She couldn't lift that.
It's a difficult concept.
It's a difficult concept for her. So, you know, you're talking about asking if a baby is a human being. That's going to be a bridge too far for some of them as well.
Well, Catholics for Life, and that was the name that they used from Rhode Island, that submitted a brief to the Supreme Court that they refused to recognize. They refused to review. They said very simple, our simple question: the rights that all of us have, where do they come from? When do they start? Right? And you ask that simple question, there's only one answer.
Right. From
the moment of conception.
Well, I like the approach, Father, for twofold reason. One, it is the silver bullet that would you know, bring about through the court system the ultimate death of the legacy of Roe. But at the same time, it's also the silver bullet that may pierce the hearts of the hardened out there, most hardened among us out there, who just can't see the real issue. You know, you can kill a baby if it's in case of rape, incest, life. They might go ahead and kill the baby there. You know, political expediency. Don't talk too loud about those instances. And I think the hardened conscience over the 50 years really needs to be softened by the exact same argument. It's a baby, not a choice. You know,
Father, we talk about changing hearts and minds of the people. But until we recognize the dignity of the preborn from the moment of conception, right, and validate that, we don't have the tools necessary to change the hearts and minds of the people going forward. But if we do that, within a couple of generations, it'll be very clear why mass murdering babies was always wrong, always immoral.
Father, we've only got a few seconds left. I'd like to just, if you can just for a brief moment touch on, as I said something earlier, and just so people understand, on the personhood amendment, some of the bishops, U.S. bishops, have come out and said, oh, no, you can't do that. It touches on the issue of twinning, meaning, you know, if you have twins that are conceived, and, you know, we can't talk about a person if there's two, and when does that happen and all of that. Do you think that's like a sort of a theological smokescreen? You know, just kind of get it. We just don't want to touch personhood because, you know, we'll become unpopular.
Look, first of all, the Emancipation Proclamation was what, 1865? It took 100 years.
Right.
100 years for the civil rights laws, right, to finally clarify the issue that started with the Emancipation Proclamation. We recognize personhood from the moment of conception. What about IVF? What about contraception, right? What about all these issues, all right? Yep. It'll take 100 years to work out legalities as far as respect to all these issues. But I don't care. Right. Let it take 100 years. The default position needs to be that these babies are unique, precious, and unrepeatable from the moment of conception, constitutional persons.
Yeah, absolutely. Well said, Father. Thank you very much for joining us and, you know, laying it out the way it needs to be laid out. God bless, Father. Thank you.
Thank you. God bless you.
Yeah, I think he makes really valid points on the court level. It's the only way that you can have one standing left, because at the referendum level, all the Supreme Court justices are saying, not my problem anymore.
Yeah.
You guys all made this law. I just have to uphold it.
They could have, and I'll say, like I said, standing out there on the steps after the Dobbs arguments, they could have gone to the fourth option right then and said, I guess sort of raises the question, and that's an interesting theory postulated there by Father Imperato, that maybe Thomas and Alito said, it's personal. We just need to say it. Let's just throw the grenade in and let the dust settle. And Roberts is like, oh, my gosh, we'll have a civil war, blah, blah. Kind of raises the question, would that be bad? Would it be bad in the United States to have a civil war over the question of the right to life of preborn children?
Kind of a precedent set already,
we already did this.
Civil war with
slavery.
Slavery, it's a person, not property. So,
when you're allowed to kill something, it's being treated as your possession.
Yeah.
That life is being treated as your possession. And on the question of slavery, it just, you could kill a slave. You wouldn't normally, because it was an economic bonus for you to own them. But the principle is still the same. You have control over this other person's life, whether they're in the womb or whether they're on a plantation picking cotton. You get to determine their destiny, living or dead.
Almost a perfect
We went
overlap.
to war over the first one.
Yeah. Well, in the U.S. alone, more than 65 million unborn children are now dead, not counting the massive death toll owing to chemical abortions done at home. Converted abortionist Bernard Nathanson once made a profound and horrifying statement, quote, "The abortion holocaust is beyond the ordinary discourse of morality and rational condemnation. It is not enough to pronounce it absolutely evil. The abortion tragedy is a new event, severed from connections with traditional presuppositions of history, psychology, politics, and morality. It extends beyond the deliberations of reason, beyond the discernment of moral judgment, beyond meaning itself. It is a mysterium tremendum, an utter mystery to the rational mind, a mystery that carries with it not only the aspect of vastness, but the resonance of terror, something so utterly diabolic as to be literally unknowable to us."
Yeah, you can never understand crazy.
It took a man who himself killed thousands of children and converted by the grace of God to say just that. The men who should have been talking that way were the vast majority of bishops and priests. Owing largely to their silence on this diabolic terror of abortion, we as a nation have become an increasingly wicked people. When Roe fell, bishops merely issued press statements. Now, buzzwords like freedom of choice or abortion is a human right are embraced as doctrines, and high-profile sham Catholics like Nancy Pelosi are able to defend abortion, spinning the evil like this.
But one word that was through all of the discussion was the word of justice. The fact that this is such an assault on women of color and women, lower income families, is just sinful. It's sinful. It's wrong that they would be able to say to women what they think women should be doing with their lives and their bodies, but it's sinful, the injustice of it all.
That's from Pastor Nancy Pelosi right there, Pastor Pelosi.
Theologian extraordinaire.
But when the bishops...
She's given permission to do that, though.
When the bishops are in silence, the authority, the moral authority is jettisoned by the bishops or not picked up. Who does? The media.
Sure. And
they legislate to it, and then the politicians that are all up on their stump, out there talking morality now all the time. They're really co-opting all these terms.
Didn't they go on like 5-10 years ago? You can't legislate morality. But now, because there's a vacuum, they've stepped in and they're legislating morality.
It was Bishop Sheen said years ago that when the Catholic Church drops certain things, the secular world picks them up.
Right.
He's talking about the nuns with their long habits. They have the maxi coats and the rosaries, and they call them love beads with the hippies and all this. Right. But this has all been co-opted too. They know that terminology matters, and they pick up on the terminology that should be used by the bishops, and they completely pervert it.
Yeah, for Nancy Pelosi to be talking about justice and talking about justice in the the black community, underprivileged community, she's part of the operation. She's just, essentially Margaret Sanger, 2.0. Let's go into those communities and let's wipe them out, and then let's, put the mask of it being justice because, oh, they're too poor to afford, to have these babies. Well, they're too poor to afford babies in those communities because of your legislative policies that your Democratic Party has pushed for 60 years.
Yeah, all the projects that impoverish the city.
It's, the hypocrisy on all of it is astounding. And again, she's just allowed to get away with everything. I mean, Archbishop Cordileone's, you can't receive Holy Communion notwithstanding. That should have been done 10 years earlier.
She's at retirement age now. She's 80 years old.
Yeah, she's just some representative now.
She's ready for retirement.
House. So, all right, with all of this before us, how now should the pro-life war proceed? Here to discuss this is Cleveland's Right to Life, Molly Smith. Molly, how are you? Always wonderful to see you.
It's so great to see you too, Michael. Wonderful to be here.
So what do we do here? I mean, you've heard part of the show. I mean, all these discussion points we've kind of summed up here for a while. There's an earthquake in Cleveland?
Sorry.
It's all right. What do we do with what do we do with all of this? I mean, the battle now is really, I don't think it's going a bridge too far to say the battle now is actually more difficult than the battle to get to the point where Roe was overturned.
I agree with you, Michael, and I think, but I do also think that it was going to come here anyway. We have to bring it into our living rooms.
Right.
And having it come to the States, it is coming right into our living rooms in Ohio, I can tell you, and across the nation. Yeah. I mean, what we've seen with the defeat of support for the unborn through the different constitutional challenges over the last, couple of months, I think what we're seeing now is that it's woken up every single pro-lifer in the country. Mm-hmm. It has said, we have got to do something about this. So what I see happening right now is that firstly, number one, needs to be a unity of all the pro-life movements. Everybody has to unite. We've got to stop with the bickering and the fighting, which of course, that's a good thing because it does get the discussions going.
Sure.
But we have to come to a unified approach.
Well, so let me ask that, because part of this, Molly, as you know, I mean, I've spoken at you're Bringing America Back to Life, symposium and convention, a number of times, and the sort of bugaboo in the room here, not your room, in the room of this discussion, has always been this contraception issue. That's it. And when you're dealing with, sort of pluralistic, diverse religious opinions, I mean, everybody who's a follower, not everybody, but many of the people in the pro-life movement are Christian, not all of them, but certainly a vast majority of them, and a huge number of them are Catholic. But the moment you start talking about issues beyond just got to save the baby, and you start talking about abortion and IVF and stem cell research and all, because that has to be all encompassed in this, because that's a human life, here's where the breakdown begins. So how do you kind of go back as, a notable national, pro-life leader, go back and say, okay, guys, we need to restructure the argument at this point. We can't wait another 50 years to determine that, well, a baby that is, comes into existence because of rape, shouldn't be killed, as Donald Trump said. It's just pro-lifers handled the whole thing wrong. They wouldn't allow for exceptions. Well, Alan Guttmacher and Planned Parenthood, 50% of all abortions are owing to failed contraception. So there's a contraceptive culture of which abortion flows from. How do we attack that when there's this massive divergence of opinion based on theologies?
Simple answer: by the grace of God, asking for his wisdom, asking for his Holy Spirit to be upon us. It is almost an insolvable problem that we're facing right now, but nothing is impossible by the grace of God. Right. So firstly, number one, we've really got to turn back to seeking his will. And we know what his will is. We know his will is the fact that we've got to go to that point where he created us. It was God that created us from that moment of conception. And how many times in a contraceptive mentality do we fail? Does the contraception fail and a child is aborted?
Right.
So we've got to be able to bring all of this information to the public, and no matter how unpopular it is, even within our churches, no matter which denomination you belong to, nobody, not one single pastor wants to talk about this.
Yeah. Why do you think that is? Is it bad for the collection plate for them? Is that what it is?
Who knows? I'm not going to make that judgment. I really don't. I think it's something that some of the pastors believe in it themselves. They believe that contraception's a good thing.
All right.
I remember talking to a priest in Africa, actually, which is where I grew up, and asking him about the whole contraceptive mentality. And he said, "Oh, come on, Molly, you should see all the little orphans that I see running around. It'd be good to get rid of some of them if they weren't born." It was like, whoa. But I can tell you that this is
Father. Wow.
Yeah. So, I think it's one of those things where we have to go in, we have to challenge. We have to challenge our legislators. I am getting more and more of the legislators, the good, solid pro-life legislators, coming to us and saying, just soften the tone a little bit. We can't talk about the whole personhood thing. Leave it alone. Let's just pass the laws we can pass. And you're stopping good laws from being passed because you insist on personhood. So when am I going to go back and fix the personhood thing? When's that going to happen?
Right.
For us, we have to be a full slate here. Otherwise, not at all.
I have to say that I've obviously known you, Molly, for about 10, 12 years or whatever. Great pleasure. Everything is absolute model, faithful Catholic. I also knew Nellie Gray, not as well as I know you, but I'd had a number of meetings with her and encounters and just, backstage chats and visits and things like that. I have to say that as I listen to you, I hear the voice, I hear the echo of Nellie Gray. And her commitment to life. And I know you're going to say, shut up, stop saying that kind of stuff publicly and all that and everything else. I know all that. But I think people need to understand that, the pro-life movement as it is needs to be in the hands of people like you who understand the larger spiritual dimension of all of this and how what that great spiritual war spills into the material world. So these compromises and these exceptions and this and that, there's just no room for them. You can never compromise with evil. You just can't.
No. So we do a little bit of evil so that some good can happen? Not in my book. Right. And not as long as I'm leading in Cleveland Righteous Life. You cannot do a little bit of evil so that good can happen. It just doesn't work. Yeah. You just get more and more evil and less good.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, that's where we come from.
Molly Smith from Cleveland Right to Life, and we'll see you at the convention in about
See you at the convention, March 10th and 11th.
It's just about 2 months, so they're 7 weeks away. I'll try my best not to get you in trouble, but I've promised you that for 10 years now, so I'll probably break the promise again and get you in trouble.
And Michael Horace will be one of our speakers, so come.
Excellent. Thank you very much for joining us, Molly. Much appreciated. God love you.
God love you too.
Yeah, it's great, great woman. But this is the thing that the passion and the energy for the pro-life movement is so contained narrowly, and the passion and the energy for the child killers is expansive because the way they cast it. And there's a PR war that needs to be won. There's an informational war that needs to be done. There's a moral war that needs to be won. There's all these battlefields all going on sort of simultaneously. There's obviously a bit of a Venn diagram where things cross over. But she's got pro-life legislators in Ohio coming to her and saying, hey, Molly, tone it down a little bit. Look, we want to get this one little bill passed over here. So stop going on about, stop going on about the truth. Just take this little kernel of the truth here, and that really has been the battle, I think, in the pro-life camp. It's the incrementalism versus the no exceptions crowd, and I don't know. One of those two sides has to say, we're throwing in the towel, and this is going to be the strategy. And frankly, I don't see it on either side.
Well, I think it's the all or nothing in both the theological and in this personhood battle. The personhood battle, as we're talking about here, it's got to be all or nothing. It's either a person or it's not.
Correct.
If it's a person, there's no exceptions, and then it has to go be recognized by the high court as a person, get the same recognition there, but also be recognized in the heart and mind and souls of the people out there.
Right.
The second one is all or nothing as well. It really is. It's the contraception, the true seamless garment, the accurate, real, credible, seamless garment that was co-opted, such a bad term because of Bernard and all these characters, tried to mix in all the evils with it. But the true seamless garment is contraception, abortion, even divorce and remarriage, the remaking of marriage with gay couples, and the whole transgender thing, and a bridge too far even for some people. But that whole thing right there, falling underneath the Sixth Commandment and the fallout of that with the you know, thou shalt not kill as well. Even King David had an instance of murder that was involved with the Bathsheba thing that happened. So there's always that, you know, co-opting life in order to, you know, for the sake of pleasure even there. But those two arguments, you know very well, the bishops don't want to get up there. I know very well for 30 years now, the priests are not allowed to talk about contraception from the pulpit. And this is the thing, they want to pick and choose and cherry pick, and they can't have absolute truth with personhood, absolute truth with the authentic seamless garment from contraception all the way down to transgender and everything in between. So unless those two things are settled right there, you're either going to talk all truth or don't talk at all.
Yeah,
you're not going to get your message across.
You're presenting a false image of the truth. And, you know, the truth is glorious in its fullness. The moment you put constraints on it and, well, don't look at this part of it, you know, cover this part of it up, you've lost the battle.
The authenticity falls apart.
That's it. All right, we're going to wrap up our coverage here, praying to, I believe, certainly Catholics know that our Blessed Mother is the patron of the pro-life movement. So we're going to finish our coverage here of this abortion 50 years later in America with a prayer and petition to our Blessed Mother with the Salve Regina. And please join us. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Salve Regina,
Mater misericordiae, vita dulcedo, et spes nostra salve. A te clamamus, exules filii Eve. A te suspiramus, gementes et flentes, in hac lacrimarum vale. Ea ergo advocata nostra. Ilos tuos misericordes oculos ad nos converte. Et Iesum benedictum fructum ventris tui, nobis post hoc exilium ostende. O clemens, O pia, O dulcis Virgo Maria.
Amen. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Again, thank you very much for joining us. Got to get into the pro-life fight right now. And now it's a more pitched battle than it has ever been. Roe v. Wade was just a lead up to this. God love you.